Hello, if you're new here, my name is June. I'm a videographer of sorts. If you're not new here, long time no see, we haven't chatted in a while. And I think the reason for that is kind of obvious. There have been a lot of movements and protests and a lot of changes in the world and a lot of cognitive challenges, I think. A lot of navigating hard questions in this past week. And one of those questions had to do with my role and my voice. What am I supposed to do during this time? What can or what can I not? Or rather, what should or should I not do? And I think the main difficulty was obviously, do I make videos about it? Do I talk about it? And a large part of that was based on the idea that I want to make room for Black voices and their community to really lead the discussion and all that stuff. But what I've noticed is that a lot of people are very loud and they try to speak up for the community, and I've seen cases where they're incorrect. I think the best way that I can contribute is to use my skill sets. And my skill sets right now are videos like this and speaking one-on-one with people, helping people kind of navigate morality, ethics, logical fallacies, that sort of thing. And culture is another big one too. So I'm thinking the next few videos, I have a lot of ideas that are kind of just, I have a lot of opinions and thoughts, I think, that are built up from this past week, and I just want to get them out on video. I do think that they provide value, and I do think that they will help me contribute in the best way that I know how, and that is why I'm going to be making these videos. So this first one's kind of just riffing off of that, and that is about the role. There's this post that's been circulating, and I'm sure it's in good intent. The post is something along the lines of, some people protest by going to protests. Some people just donate quietly. Some people support at home. It's great. It makes sense. But I think it's quickly becoming associated with becoming a defense mechanism or a justification to yourself. Because I think we go through these times where it is difficult, it is tiresome or draining, let's say, to think about these matters every single day. I think we can all agree that it's been a blast on social media, not in a positive sense, but it's been coming at you nonstop. And people have different tolerance levels for that. That's fine. But when we begin to use phrases like that and justifications like that, I feel like that becomes a crutch and an excuse for ourselves to not be actively doing stuff, to not be an activist, and to kind of take a back seat and be like, it's okay, take a break, go do something else, you have a normal life. And I'm not exactly sure how to express this thought, because I do understand it, and I do think it's a very good sentiment, and I think it's a very healthy way to approach life. But the reality of that is that I think it justifies inaction. If you are not actively going to protest, if you're not donating, if you're not signing petitions, even though I don't know how effective those things are, or the petitions, I mean, you're not doing anything. I think the best thing you can argue is that you're contributing indirectly, but I don't see how that replaces direct support. And this is a discussion that I had with myself as well, because I'm the first person who will try to be understanding of that, to be like, yeah, everybody has their own pace, everybody has their own tolerance. You can't really place expectations on everybody to act the same way and in the same capacity. But on the same note, I'm also the first person to call that out in my friends or in myself, really, that, yeah, I'm kind of using it as an excuse to distance myself from the direct action. And I guess as more of a concrete example, for me, the protests was a big mental battle, I guess, because at least in Vancouver, I know that there were people protesting the lockdown, which I wholeheartedly disagreed with, because A, I didn't think we were in a lockdown, and B, you're just putting yourselves at risk and the community at risk. But the people who, like me, were dissenting voices of that protest were the same people going out to the Black Lives Matter protest. And honestly, going out to the protest, I think is fine. But then when you're arguing with people who are calling you out on that, if your argument is, oh, we're risking our lives for something better, to me that sounds like a number of alarms. The first one being that you're making it about you. That's one. Two, it's not a matter of your life, it's the matter of others' lives, the community at large, the people around you. We're in a global pandemic, so those are global lives that you're putting at risk, not just your own. But at the same time, you're right. You are fighting for something that's very important, and that's very, something that has gone on for over 400 years versus 1 year, not even. So weighing those things is an entirely different thing that I kind of am working through. but also the hypocrisy of the people arguing, the hypocrisy of changing an agenda and your stance on something so fluidly as if there's no issue with that. When I think if you are a person of logic, or at least of morality, really, or of calling yourself out, then shouldn't that be a little bit more difficult to answer in terms of you being a hypocrite? Anyway, so things like that's what I was working through. These are all questions kind of directed at myself as well, and things that I wanted to be mindful of in my discourse with anybody around me in my personal network. So much like that kind of question, I'm sorry, I'm totally rambling. This will be the only rambly video. The other ones will actually be structured, I promise. Hopefully, we'll see. But anyways, the reason I'm talking about that is because the act of protesting, I think, is a fundamental action that you should do. I myself, I have not protested physically yet. I have not been to a protest, and it's so easy for me to justify that. My family is at risk. If I bring COVID back home, they're gone. Like all 3 of them. So for me, it's super easy and it's a no-brainer to not go out. But at the same time, it's not easy for me to say that it's wrong for me to go out given those circumstances. Because from a logical standpoint, yeah, it makes sense. I don't want to kill off my family and be the reason that they all die. But at the same time, I think it's wrong to not go show your support at the protest. I strongly feel about that. But obviously, I strongly feel about my family. So for me, it's not such an easy matter to definitively answer. But at the same time, I can accept that I'm not doing my part. And I think that's where people get lost, where they get hung up over the fact that they can't admit that they are being hypocrites, they are making a mistake, or they are neglecting their duties as a, participant in humanity, really. And that's okay. It's not okay, but like, you can be wrong. You know what I mean? Like, that is not an impossible thing. I don't know. It was a weird revelation to me. Like, I will not go protest and risk getting COVID because I will not risk my family's life. And that is perfectly fine and reasonable to me. But I can also at the same time believe that me not going to the protest is wrong. So the larger point here is that I think everybody needs to realize that we have a fundamental list of things that we need to do if we want to properly support Black Lives Matter. Both the movement, the organization, everyone associated with them, and George Floyd. The way you support cannot change daily at your own discretion to make yourself comfortable. These are very uncomfortable times, and we cannot simplify them to fit our needs. So now if everybody has a fundamental role of partaking in these protests, these discussions, donating, sharing information, educating, then what is everybody else's role? What are these people talking about when they say some people protest at home, some people do this, some people do XYZ? And for me, it became very evident that my role was to pose questions on my social media, to get people thinking in different ways, in both ways, to play devil's advocate without being a brat about it, to be snobby about it. I think my role was and is and will be to spur conversation and to engage in conversation with people. So over this past week, I've been talking either one-on-one or just risking getting into Facebook arguments. I've been lucky thus far, but to engage in the greater discourse, I guess, surrounding this issue. So one area is the discussion of Asians, Asian Americans, Asian Canadians, and more FOBI Asians, and the relationship with Black people and the Black community and Black Lives Matter. And then there's the issue of police defunding. There's the issue of the Black Square thing. There's the issue of hypocrisy. Somebody brought up logical fallacies and only gave examples of one side of the argument, not the other side. And there's an endless list of things that are very complex and very nuanced, and you need to really work through them slowly and not go with the easy answer, or rather, the easy answers, plural. Because as much as we don't want this to become a two-sided argument, because it's not as simple as that, a lot of people make it that way, or at least make it seem that way. They say you either agree with me or you're out. And I mean, I can't fault them for that, because if you are arguing against racism, that looks very bad. It is very bad, not just looks very bad. It's unbelievable. And that's what a lot of people on this quote unquote side are terrified by the fact that people don't see racism or understand it. And then there are people on the other side who are taking one-off kind of research papers by very questionable sources, I will say, but some very legitimate as well. There was somebody who was giving facts from a number of different sources that I've researched or looked into, and I was hoping to find that they were biased, but a lot of people were saying that they weren't biased, or a lot of sources were saying or vouching for their kind of validity. The whole thing about looting and protesting, some people are more on the fence than you might think about that. We can understand it. Do we necessarily condone it? That's kind of a different issue. But then there are people who water that argument or that whole discussion down into, or you're comparing property to human lives. And you're not. That's obviously you're not. What you might be considering or comparing are human lives to human lives. People's livelihood and things that people have worked hard to build up over the span of years being completely crushed and destroyed overnight, some people dying protecting their stores, is not a property versus lives thing. But a lot of people try to make it seem like that so that they can belittle any dissenting voices. And it's a tactic, and it works, and it makes sense because there are people who are comparing property to lives. And yeah, they're just piece of shits. But there are other people who are a little bit iffy about it, who aren't thinking of comparing property to lives, because that's a no-brainer. So things like that. Those are the discussions or types of discussions that I've been having with people, more so in private. So as I was kind of engaging in those conversations, though, I think I can do a little bit better by making videos like this about it. Not really as like a guidebook, although undoubtedly, inevitably, my own opinions will be part of this video or these videos, but more as kind of a cause for pause, a reminder to really call yourself out, evaluate what you're doing. It's taken me a couple of days, maybe a week or a little bit longer to come to terms with that. The fact that I do want to share my thoughts and my voice, because I do think that they bring value to the table and to conversations in general. And I've tried to be fair in this week. Certain things are no-brainers. Like I said, if you're against racism, if you don't think racism is real, that's a very big and very deep issue that you need to deal with. That's just the fact of the matter. At this point, if you are ignoring that, you are lying to yourself, and you're doing a very big disservice to yourself, really. That's it. That's the main issue. But then there are other things that are not so clearly evil, such as, the protest and the complete abolishment of the police. If you don't know, if you haven't researched the topic, you shouldn't be bandwagoning. You should be researching. And yeah, and I think that's the other main thing, is to take things with a grain of salt. What you see on social media, as much as people like to believe that, everybody can do the research and find it, it's so easy to find very biased facts and biased logic and reasoning. Honestly, I think with a little bit of rhetoric, a little bit of feigned or pretend research, you can argue that racism doesn't exist. And I think you could find a lot of people who will believe you just based on one study and a little bit of language. So I think my role, in addition to the basics, is one of facilitating discussion, of asking these kind of more difficult questions in a way that does not offend. Because I think a lot of people do have these questions, and then the way they ask is very inciting, aggressive, or just inviting argument. So I don't know if this is arrogant of me to say that, but I do think that I'm able to present those questions in a slightly more reserved manner that will get less backlash. And I think that is my role, because I think these questions need to be asked and need to be answered as well, in order for us to progressively make the right decisions that are not brash, that are not misinformed or completely emotional. So anyways, that's probably the vomit for today. So I would like to end this video with a prompt. What is your role? What are your strengths, and how are you going to use them to contribute to this moment of history? Are you going to document these protests to make sure that people are safe? Make sure to blur out their faces. I think people have talked about that. Are you going to be the one that actually does the research and reading all of the essays and all the papers and the books and the literature? Or are you going to be the one that is unbiased and actually looking at news sources from both sides and trying to find a middle ground, calling both sides out on their fallacies and their lies? Are you going to be the second generation immigrant, talking to their first generation parents and seeing what you can do to bring them on board? Mind you, without being immature and aggressive, and using those strengths and talents then the next question would be, how are you going to contribute in a way that doesn't leave a bad taste or feelings of remorse and regret in the future, to know that you capitalized off of this, off of people's pain and oppression? Please find your role that is in addition to the basics of protesting, donating, and educating yourself and others. Anyways, hope that leaves you with something to think about. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.